Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a really close look at one of the most practical questions in economics, really. What actually happens when the government steps into a free market?
Right. We hear about policies all the time, don't we? New taxes, price caps.
Exactly. Production limits.
Yeah.
But the way the market reacts, well, it often looks quite different from what the politicians promised.
That's precisely the tension. Our goal here is to sort of cut through the noise and use the basic supply and demand tools to figure out the real consequences.
So we're talking taxation, price controls, quantity regulations.
Yeah. The big three. We want to forecast the actual market outcomes. That's, I think, the most powerful thing you can take away when you're thinking about government intervention.
And I think what trips people up most, maybe, is this gap between what the law says will happen and what the market actually does. Like,
Yeah.
the law says a company pays the tax, but suddenly I'm paying more at the checkout. How does that work?
Exactly. That's a perfect place to start. Taxes are a great example of this, often quite counterintuitive phenomenon.
Okay, let's dive in. Say the government puts a tax on the sellers. A specific tax, maybe a dollar per widget they sell. What does that do to their costs?
Well, straight away, their marginal cost for producing each widget goes up by that dollar.
Right.
So to be willing to sell the same number of widgets as before, they now need to receive a dollar more per widget.
Which means the supply curve shifts.
Precisely. It shifts upward, or you could say it shifts to the left on the graph. Either way, it represents that higher cost.
And what does that shift do to the market price and quantity?
Well, the total quantity sold is going to fall. Buyers end up paying a higher price than they did before the tax.
Okay.
And sellers, they receive that higher price, yes, but then they have to hand over the dollar tax to the government. So the amount they actually keep is lower than before.
So less is sold, buyers pay more, sellers keep less. Seems straightforward enough.
It does. But now here's the interesting twist.
Ah, okay.
What if the government levies that same $1 tax, but this time it's legally on the buyers? They pay the tax at the register.
Okay, so it's not a production cost anymore, it's something else.
Right. For the buyer, it reduces their willingness to pay the seller. Think about it. If you are willing to pay, say, $10 for that widget, and you know you'll have to pay an extra dollar in tax, you're now only willing to offer the seller $9.
Ah, I see. So it lowers the marginal benefit for the buyer.
Yeah.
That must shift the demand curve then, leftward.
Exactly. Demand shifts left. And that new lower demand curve crosses the original supply curve at, well, lower quantity.
And the price.
The price the seller receives goes down, but the total price the buyer pays the seller's price plus the tax that goes up.
Wait a second. Lower quantity, higher price for buyers, lower retained price for sellers. That sounds familiar.
It should, because if you compare the final outcomes quantity sold, price buyers pay, net price sellers keep BES, they are identical to when the tax was levied on the sellers.
Okay, wow. So that's the core lesson here, isn't it? Who the law says pays the tax?
The statutory burden?
Right, the statutory burden. It actually doesn't matter for who really ends up paying. The economic burden is the same either way.
That is the absolute key takeaway. Governments choose who writes the check, sure, that's the statutory part, but the market adjusts immediately. Prices change, quantities change.
Creating this kind of tax wedge you mentioned.
Exactly. A gap between what the buyer pays and what the seller keeps. The economic burden or the tax incidence is how that wedge gets shared, and it's totally independent of who the law points its finger at.
So if the law is irrelevant for the economic burden, what does determine who pays more?
Ah, now we get to the real driver. Elasticity. Price elasticity of demand and supply.
Elasticity.
Yeah.
Meaning how responsive buyers and sellers are to price changes, how easily they can adjust.
Precisely. It boils down to who can more easily walk away or change their behavior to avoid the tax.
Okay, let's take the seller's side. If supply is really elastic, maybe it's easy for them to switch to making something else if this product gets taxed.
Like a software company that can pivot projects relatively easily.
Yeah, something like that. How does that affect their share of the tax?
If sellers are flexible, highly elastic, they won't just sit there and absorb the tax. They'll reduce production, maybe even leave the market.
So they avoid the burden by cutting back?
Correct. They bear a smaller share. Because they cut back supply so readily, it forces the buyers, who still want the product, to shoulder more of the price increase caused by the tax.
Okay, flip side. What if buyers have lots of options? Demand is highly elastic, like choosing between dozens of fizzy drinks.
Perfect example. If demand is elastic, Buyers are super sensitive to price changes. Tax one brand, they just switch to another.
So they easily avoid the tax too.
Right. They bear a smaller share of the burden. The sellers in that competitive environment know they can't pass much of the tax on to consumers without losing sales, so they end up absorbing more of it themselves.
So the rule is basically whichever side is more inelastic, less flexible, fewer options, they get stuck with more of the tax burden.
That's exactly it. Think about a tax on something like insulin versus a tax on luxury yachts.
Okay. Insulin demand is very inelastic, right? People need it.
Absolutely. Patients have almost no substitutes. So any tax on insulin, whether it's legally on the drug company or the patient, is going to be paid almost entirely by the patients in the form of higher prices.
Whereas luxury yachts.
Demand is highly elastic. If the price jumps due to a tax, potential buyers can easily just wait or buy something else luxurious. So the burden of that tax, it's likely to fall much more heavily on the yacht builders and dealers trying to make sales.
That really changes how you look at tax policy debates. Okay, before we move off this, what about subsidies? Government payments to people or firms?
You can think of a subsidy as just a negative tax. It does the opposite.
Yeah.
Instead of shifting supplier demand left, it shifts the relevant curve outward. It encourages more activity.
So more quantity sold, lower prices for buyers, higher net revenue for sellers.
Correct. And crucially, the question of who benefits most from that subsidy.
Let me guess.
Okay.
It also depends on elasticity, not who gets the check.
You got it. The less elastic side captures more of the benefit. If supply of something is very inelastic, think about land near a city center and the government subsidizes housing construction.
Then the landowners might capture a lot of the benefit through higher land prices.
Very likely. The benefit doesn't just automatically flow to the intended renters or buyers if the supply side is constrained. The market dictates the distribution.
Fascinating. So costs or benefits, the market's underlying structure calls the shots.
Always. Elasticity rules.
Okay, let's shift gears then. From taxes and subsidies, which work through incentives, to direct government commands about price ceilings and price floors.
Right. Direct intervention. A price ceiling sets a legal maximum price. Usually the idea is to make things like rent or food more affordable.
And a price floor.
Sets a legal minimum price, think minimum wage or maybe agricultural price supports, often aimed at protecting producers or workers.
Now, before we even talk consequences, you mentioned something crucial, whether the control is binding. What does that actually mean?
It just means, does the rule actually interfere with where the market would naturally go? A price ceiling only binds if it's set below the free market equilibrium price.
Why below?
Well, if the market price for bread is, say, $2 a loaf, and the government sets a ceiling of $3, nothing happens.
Right, because everyone's already trading below the ceiling.
Exactly. The market just ignores it. It's non-binding. To have an effect, the ceiling must force the price down from where it wants to be. So below equilibrium.
And for a price floor, it's the opposite. It must be set above the equilibrium price to bind.
Correct. A minimum wage only matters if it's higher than the wage the market would have set on its own.
Okay, so let's focus on binding controls because that's where things get interesting, or maybe messy. A binding price ceiling, like strict rent control, way below market rates in a popular city. What happens?
The inevitable result is a shortage. At that artificially low price, the quantity demanded by renters will shoot up, while the quantity supplied by landlords will fall. More people want apartments than are available.
The goal was affordability, but the outcome is scarcity.
Precisely. And because sellers, the landlords in this case, can't raise the price to match demand or even cover rising costs.
Their incentive to maintain the property plummets, right?
Absolutely. Why spend money on repairs if you're losing money on the low rent anyway? So you see quality go down. Deferred maintenance, worse living conditions.
And the shortage has to be dealt with somehow. If not price, then what?
Non-price rationing takes over, long waiting lists, landlords playing favorites, maybe illegal side payments, key money, or bribes just to get an apartment.
Black markets, too, presumably. People subletting illegally at higher rates.
Oh, definitely. Black markets thrive under price ceilings. The official price is low, but the actual cost of getting the good, factoring in time wasted, potential bribes, lower quality can be very high.
So trying to kill the price doesn't kill the scarcity problem, it just changes its form.
It just morphs. It finds other ways to manifest.
Okay, what about the other way? A binding price floor. A minimum price set above what the market wants. Like, say, the government guaranteeing a high price for milk.
Well, if the price is forced high, sellers are eager to supply more milk. But buyers want less at that high price. So you get the opposite of a shortage,
A surplus.
a surplus. Quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. But here's the catch. The amount actually sold is limited to whatever buyers are willing to purchase at that high floor price.
So producers make all this extra milk, but a lot of it just sits there.
Potentially, yes. They can't find enough buyers at the legally mandated price. This leads to its own set of problems. Oh, what do you do with the surplus? Sellers might be tempted to sell it illegally below the floor price, creating another kind of black market.
Or they might pressure the government.
Exactly. Lobby the government to buy up the excess milk to keep the price floor from collapsing. This often leads to storage costs, spoilage, or sometimes giving it away as aid, which can distort other markets.
So wasted resources. And competition must be fierce among sellers for those few buyers willing to pay the high price.
Very fierce. It can drive out more efficient producers who could have sold profitably at a lower price but can't compete under the floor system. It's often quite wasteful.
So ceilings give us shortages and quality issues. Floors give us surpluses and waste. Neither sounds ideal.
They show how the market really pushes back against being forced away from equilibrium.
All right, one last category of intervention. Quantity regulations. Instead of controlling the price, the government directly limits the amount, usually called a quota.
That's right. A quota sets a maximum allowed quantity of a good or service that can be bought or sold. Think import quotas or limits on fishing catches.
And like price controls, does it need to be binding?
Yes. A quota only has an effect if it's set below the quantity the market would naturally trade at equilibrium. If you set a quota allowing 1 million widgets, but the market only wants 500,000 anyway, the quota does nothing.
Okay, so assume a binding quota. It restricts supply below the equilibrium level. What does that do to the price?
Well, now you have a fixed, artificially scarce quantity. Buyers know there are only so many units available.
So they compete.
They compete intensely for those limited units. And that competition among buyers is what drives the price up, potentially way up.
So unlike a price floor, which fixes the price high and causes a quantity surplus, a quota fixes the quantity low, and the market determines the resulting high price.
Exactly. The price will rise along the demand curve until it reaches the point where quantity demanded equals the fixed quota amount. The scarcer the quota makes the good, the higher the price buyers will bid it up to.
Can you give some real-world examples?
Sure. We mentioned import quotas. Think about limits on the number of immigrants with certain skills allowed into a country that's a quota on labor supply.
Right.
Or, historically, taxi medallions in cities like New York. They were essentially quotas limiting the number of cabs.
And those medallions became incredibly expensive. Right. Because the quota created artificial scarcity.
Precisely. The limited supply made the right to operate a taxi extremely valuable, driving up medallion prices and, consequently, fares for passengers. Another example is limits on medical school spots or residency funding that acts like a quota on new doctors.
Which can contribute to higher doctor salaries, but also access issues for patients.
It certainly can affect both price and availability. The quota creates value for those inside the system who hold the right to supply.
Okay, this feels like a complete toolkit now. If we see any government regulation, tax, price control, quota, we have a checklist.
That's the idea. Step 1, is it binding? Does it actually interfere with the market equilibrium?
Step 2, if it's a price rule, ceiling or floor, remember the price is fixed and the quantity traded will be the smaller of quantity demanded or supplied at that price.
Right. The short side of the market dominates.
And step 3, if it's a quantity rule, a quota, the quantity is fixed and the price will adjust based on demand intersecting that fixed quantity.
Perfectly summarized. And that loops us back to the big picture lesson. That government interventions, whatever their legal form, don't happen in a vacuum. The market reacts based on fundamental principles.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand, and crucially, elasticity. Who really pays a tax? Who really benefits from a subsidy, whether you get a shortage or a surplus? It's not determined by the law's wording. It's determined by those underlying market forces.
It makes you think about the intentions versus the outcomes. Policies aiming to help might end up creating scarcity or lowering quality or creating these weird side markets.
The market always finds ways to adjust, to allocate the burden or the benefit, often in ways policymakers didn't foresee.
So a final thought for listeners. Next time you hear about a new tax proposal or a price cap or a limit on something,
Don't just focus on who the law says is responsible or who is supposed to be helped.
instead, ask.
Ask, how elastic is demand in this market? How elastic is supply? Because that flexibility or lack thereof is what will truly determine where the economic consequences land. That's the real predictor